come join us. All right, go ahead.
Great. Louis Lancaster, Director of Solution Delivery and IoT with Solstice Mobile. We are a professional services firm based out of Chicago. We build digital products for Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Sam McDonald, CTO of Hotel Tonight. We are a global booking, hotel booking online travel agent, mobile only. And if you don't have Hotel Tonight installed on your phones, you should do that now. Okay.
Hi, I'm Vishwa Sharma. Metanoia Inc. is a consultancy, and we work with vendors and service providers of telecom and networking equipment. So our focus right now is to look at how the infrastructure gets affected when you have all these billions of devices connected and the different use cases that you've probably heard of a lot in the last couple of days.
All right, we're going to go ahead and kick it off. And really, I have a number of questions that we're going to go through. And then we are going to perhaps have some time to open it up for questions as well. So I guess, one of the things that's quite interesting to me is people who talk about IoT oftentimes, sort of smart refrigerators or thermostats. I heard a speaker here this morning talk about thermostats, or maybe it was in the keynote. He said, thermostats are great, but thermostats are okay. So, but maybe that doesn't really capture the range of things, and I'm really trying to get a sense for the audience of sort of the range. If you could give some examples, and sort of the more out there, the better, so we get a sense of kind of how applicable this technology is across many domains, that would be awesome.
Great, yeah, so I like to always talk about this as giving examples of actually going to a hotel when I was traveling, running late, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if I could check in and automatically go up to my room without having to go to the front desk? Well, guess what? You can do that now. Hilton's doing that. A couple other chains are doing that. I always say, how can we answer the question of why can't this do that or this do this? And I think now we have the opportunity to do this. I think what we're seeing, especially in the consumer market right now, is a lot of, hey, we should just connect something for the sake of connecting it without really understanding what the reason or the use case is behind that. And that's more so in the consumer space. On the industrial side, when we talk about fleet management, telematics, and predictive maintenance and things like those are real hard ROI use cases that we're talking about with our clients about implementing those, and that's really where where the market is, and especially when we take the division between consumer and industrial in the IoT space, that's really where the money is, and then the real hard use cases on the industrial side.
Yeah, I think in the consumer sector, I think what we look at is how do we turn traditional, online marketing from, demographic-based intelligence to behavioral-based intelligence. And so, the mobile phone is your first, kind of foray into being able to really understand the context of a user, whether it's location, whether they're moving in a car. You can figure these things out, and you can use it to better refine your search algorithms, and provide more data and more context into what the user's actually doing. And so, being able to target psychographics versus demographics, I think is going to be a huge change in the industry, and it's going to get more granular and more powerful. And so when we look at IoT or just sensors and data, we really look at it as a way of kind of identifying behaviors and then figuring out how we can pass that information on to our hotel partners and have them be able to just target more accurately.
Yeah, so Bernard, I'd like to talk about the fact that the two major use cases that are hidden from the general consumer use case is healthcare and industrial IoT, which Louis also mentioned. And if you look at the numbers, there was a McKinsey study that predicted that by 2020, the total economic value of the IoT sort of ecosystem is expected to be like $6.2 trillion. And out of that, industrial IoT is going to be about $2.3 trillion, and healthcare is 2.1, or the other way around. So they cover between them about 80% of what the market would look like. And the use cases In healthcare, I mean, there's a whole variety of them, but just a couple that you can think of, and they're not definitely not necessarily out there, is that you can take telematics from the patient. You can sort of take it over the network, back to the cloud. You can process and correlate that. So maybe somebody has certain allergies, certain drugs don't react well to them, they're now in the hospital admitted for something. You did that correlation and you push that information back out to the healthcare provider, a doctor or nurse on their mobile device, then they're actually servicing that. And that's a huge advantage because the leading cause of death in the US is what is called idiopathic diagnosis, which means we basically don't know. It's a hospital error. So, and it usually happens when you don't correlate these kinds of very hard to do correlations, because drug reactions are very hard to predict. So that's an example right there where a small change in how you do telematics and how you communicate that information back could lead to, of course, saving lives, but also billions of dollars saved in wrong diagnoses and so forth.
Okay, well, I'll share a couple of examples that I've encountered. One is not quite IoT, but it is this hotel thing. I got a thing from a hotel chain I go to, and they said, great news, we have a mobile app. You can now check in online. You don't have to go to the front desk. I said, that is awesome. Because, who wants to spend time at the front desk? So I checked in, it was awesome, then I showed up and it was like, oh, but to get your key, you have to go to the front desk. So I was still standing behind the same people that I'm always irritated about standing behind, and it was even worse for the hotel chain because now I was angry at them. Before I would have just been angry at the people in front of me, now I was angry at the hotel chain. You didn't help me a bit. You made my life worse. But on a positive side, kind of associated with the health thing, what a consumer is Withing Scale. I'm sure you guys know Withings, right? Awesome company, beautiful designs. French company, they just got bought last week by who it was, but a bunch of money. But they have a scale that you get on it. It'll tell you how much you weigh. It'll tell you what the fat percentage of your body is. It'll tell you what the CO2 is. But it's hooked up to social media. And actually, you can hook it up to send your information to your doctor as well. But Penn and Teller, one of them that talks, I don't know if you know this, but he lost a ton of weight, like 100 pounds. And he did it with a Withing scale. And every morning he got on it and it tweeted out all of his stats to his friends. And he's got a big video about basically how it saved his life. It's an awesome story, awesome product, very interesting IoT. So, a lot of range of uses that are pretty amazing. So, so now we know that there's lots of ways you can use it, some really profound ways, some industrial ways, some trivial ways, and in fact some kind of irritating ways. What are the critical elements of an IoT offering? What, if you're a product manager somewhere and you say, we ought to IoT our something or other, ordering burritos, or whatever it might be, what do you have to put in place? And why don't we start with
So there's a couple of things, just building upon the example that I gave, right? I mean, I think one of the most important things is the ability to simplify a specific task at hand in a non-intrusive manner. So, I mean, in the example I just gave, if you're taking patient data, I mean, there really should be a seamless process. You have some sensors, you have some devices that are either on the patient or close by, and they're the ones that are monitoring that data. And then once you processed it, when it comes back, it should be something that automatically just shows up at the doctor or nurse's station or their mobile device. So that's, I think, a key, because if it becomes too intrusive, then it kind of just loses its meaning. And if you think about it in an industrial context, where you have lots of sensors deployed, then the ability to manage those devices, I think, is very critical. If you can't manage these devices, there's not much you can do with them. And even from the industrial IoT perspective, there's like the ability to deploy these things at scale. If you cannot kind of deploy them and leave them there, you have to to kind of have somebody physically go do things with them, then that's a problem too. So I think those are some couple considerations in what you need in terms of critical element for the offer.
I do have a Withing scale, and I do not post my weight online. That would depress me. But I do think it's an amazing technology. But I have to say my favorite connected device. I have two devices that I bought recently that are just really, really great. One is an Eero Wi-Fi system that basically uses uses Bluetooth or a different connection technology to basically spread Wi-Fi out through your house so you don't have any dead zones. It's really cool, it's easy to set up. It has an app I'd say that's one route to go, is just have an app and an easy interface. But my favorite all-time purchase are the Philips Hue lights that just connect in through your whole house. My whole house has them, and it is just the coolest thing ever. You can
Pulsing blue lights, right?
Pulsing light. But what they've done is, I think, the smartest thing, and it frustrated me at first because their app is okay. They created an API for it, and so there are a bunch of third-party apps out there that are much better than the Philips app. And then also, they've also done integrations, on your iPhone with the widgets, or you pull down, just so it's very quick to access. And then they've just thought about the use case really well and how to make it really accessible. And they're not trying to own the whole ecosystem; they're just trying to make it accessible. And I think that's the key thing you have to really think about. Is just how do you get it into a usable, friendly ecosystem for the user.
Yeah, just to expand upon on those points, what the most important thing is actually starting with a viable use case. And when we talk about critical elements, it's defining understanding who the users are, going out, talking to them, and understanding what it is that they want, and then piecing the technology, putting the technology pieces together in order to do that, right? And so, we have a number of we have a program work stream document that we use to kind of, when we go through a full stack implementation with our clients from an IoT perspective, we're talking about use case, industrial design, the physical product, infrastructure, security. There's a bunch of critical elements that go into a solution, but the first one is actually defining what it is that you're going to build and how that interaction is going to look, whether that's going to be sensors deployed out into a manufacturing plant or a farm, or it's a physical consumer product itself, and then how are you going to be building the digital interface that's going to be going along with that, whether that's an app, a website, some type of dashboard concept. The first critical piece is actually starting with what the user needs.
Actually, I'll just add to that. So clearly the use case is very critical, and the next thing is thinking about the end-to-end architecture. So one can think about the app or the front end, but you also need to think about the entire flow of that information, because that's what you're really trying to do here. And where does it go at the back end into the cloud? How does it get processed? What do you need to do that? And then how does it flow right back? Because in the end, you're going to actuate you have to take some action on the information that you just processed. So if that path has not been thought through and there is some bottleneck there that you discover when you're halfway through your use case, that's a bad place to be in. So I think that is pretty important.
Yeah, so that end about sort of connectivity and hookup. I also have a Withings blood pressure monitor that has the ability to connect into your doctor's office and easily send your results to the doctor's office, which is great, because then when you show up, they're not just looking at the blood pressure you had 5 minutes ago in an artificial situation. They're looking at real time and stuff like that. Well, this question you just addressed really leads perfectly into the next one, which is around user interface and user experience. I would say that thing that I pointed out about that hotel chain, they had not thought through the end-to-end user experience for the reasons that I outlined. And this kind of reminds me, so you laid out some technical stuff and then you got on to user interface. You talked about user experience, or end-to-end. Kind of reminds me of a concept I've heard talked about, like design thinking. I think it seems quite relevant. Could you talk about sort of, and really, I think, Sam, you could probably add this, because I think your business basically has to really have really convenient design thinking and user experience. So maybe, Sam, you could start talking about that, but I think this is so key. And a lot of people say, well, the consumer stuff has to be easy, as though the industrial stuff, it's okay if it's a pain in the ass to use. And I think that's probably not where you want to be, so.
Consumers just won't buy it. They won't use it. Your hotel example is just really great, because we did have express check-in for about a year, and the logistics were just really difficult, but we did make it, we did have it, we were successful because we did think about the user experience, and we thought about a goal of having the ability for the user or the hotel guest to skip the front desk. I mean, that was the goal, and so we would actually have the key sent to the bellman, or someone who wasn't. So you just avoided the front desk at all costs. And so just thinking about the user experience is critical. I think when it comes to a user or a consumer experience, I think you have to think about the multitude of devices that are going to impact a user's life, and then how they're going to access all of those different situations and all that different data and make it useful to them versus a burden. And so I think simplifying is, what we focus on as much as possible. Even with booking a hotel room, how do we, 3 taps and a swipe, how do you make it as simple as possible? When I think about, IoT, it's just hard for me to imagine a successful path outside of Apple or Google in the consumer space, making this a platform where there is a single interface for all these different devices that keeps your preferences, that tracks all this data, that makes it all very accessible and also contextually aware. What's available at the time, you could imagine, 100 different, devices that you have preferences about, and yet only 10 of them are kind of in your current context. You kind of want to be able to manipulate what's there, and then you probably don't even really want to manipulate everything. You want it to remember your behavior and your patterns, and you want this system to be able to handle and automate as much as possible to make it simple. I'd say that's what I would think about, just trying to simplify all this data and make it accessible.
Yeah, I look at it in 2 ways. One is the end user, which we've already talked about, sort of the retail user. There obviously ease of use, whatever app you have, the ability that self-installs, self-updates and so on is critical. And then, as you rightly said, Bernard, that doesn't mean that the industrial user should be saddled with sort of very archaic things. But I think from the industrial user's perspective, there's one more component, which is the ability to store and visualize that information. So I'm thinking here, let's say, of a shop floor supervisor, right? They've got sensors on a bunch of machines. Maybe they're running 1,000 machines, 1,000 copies of some machine that's in a shop floor plan, and they have sensors which are going to correlate, sort of glitches that the machines have, or they're taking information to help you monitor how good the machines are doing right now. And then you need to be able to correlate that so that if I see some glitches, I know historically over time that means the machine is going to have some XYZ problems 2 weeks from now, so I can plan for that. And so I, as a shop floor supervisor, need at some point the ability to now query this information. So it's great, you have the sensors, they go to the back end, they give me some information back, and now I need to be able to query it, run some things that will help me decide, okay, am I going to order parts for the 2 machines that you're telling me are going to fail, or can I run some query on 1,000 machines and see, well, are 2 more going to fail now? So I can make sure I order parts in advance, and I'm not doing that again a few days from now. So things like that. So I think that's very important. And the other is the ability to derive some back-end analytics. And that applies in any scenario, whether it's industrial or healthcare. I mean, a pathologist might want to query a database when they're doing blood tests and seeing everybody's blood having some kind of a virus showing up. What does that mean? Does it mean we got a virus outbreak happening, we have a malaria parasite coming? So I need the ability to do that.
Yeah, going back to, Bernard, your question about design thinking, what we're seeing, and I would say if there's anyone in the audience that's an enterprise thinking about, if you're a consumer product company thinking about connecting your products or even introducing an IoT experience, the design thinking concepts and the reasoning behind that and how we get to user needs. And this panel is about understanding customer data and anticipating needs. And it's just not about the data, it's about actually talking and having that conversation. So going back to the design thinking concepts is, first mapping out what that journey is. If the hotel would have looked at and understood that, hey, when you still had to go to the front desk, you were going to be pissed off, they probably wouldn't, well, maybe they still would have, but they probably wouldn't have implemented the experience or added that to it, right? And then understanding how do we, maybe having a data scientist on staff to say, this is how we need to implement data collection and analytics across digital and the physical channel to understand what's happening with our products. And then implementing and starting to think more like a software company where you have a voice of customer team instead of just a market research team that you probably traditionally would have. Because now once you put software in your product, you're starting a conversation, right? Once you have a digital product in the hands of the mobile and on a mobile phone with the user, you're starting a conversation. So being able to, with the data that you're collecting, continue that conversation from a qualitative perspective with the user is extremely important. And that's a lot of the design thinking concepts where you start to talk about user experience and customer experience and mapping out what that entire journey is. That's where we're seeing a lot of companies struggling and taking steps towards being more like a software company or even like a startup within a large enterprise to be able to understand what the customer wants, understand the data, and anticipate more needs. And that's really where the magic is going to start to happen, not just connecting the products, it's really transforming the way that the organizations are structured to become more like a startup and more like a digital company.
Yeah, I think that is I just want to underscore that point because that's a very hard thing for both the people building the ecosystem and the people using. You talked about the enterprises, they don't have that design thinking at all today in their entire process loop. And even the designers, I mean, we still have a very fragmented design process. You design either the interface, or you design the actual sensor, or you design the backend.
Right.
You never think about it end to end. What is the user going to do with that data and how are they going to use it? That's where the design thinking comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, even when you think about a product, and I'm sure we all have smart products in our homes, if the onboarding and the setup is through an app and the product itself, even if it's the firmware on the product that's causing an issue, the user thinks the user doesn't care where the issue is, right? So bringing all these pieces together and implementing a solution is extremely important. So you have to have your EEs at the table, your firmware guys at the table, your hardware guys, your industrial designers, your digital people. Everyone needs to be at the table as part of this entire process to make sure that the experience that's being created is as seamless as possible.
I'll just echo about the analytics and all that. I saw the head of global analytics for Tetra Pak speak, it was 8 or 9 months ago. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with Tetra Pak, but they're sort of a non-chilled packaging that you can get milk in or soups and stuff like that. And it's a very interesting process because basically they construct the package around the liquid. So they sort of shoot the liquid in and they construct the package around. It's fascinating, fascinating thing. But what this guy said was, it's done a lot of dairies, right? Because they're pumping the milk and they create these things. So they have these Tetra Pak machines on their sites. And what they would find is every so often the blades would get dull. They wouldn't cut the pack correctly. And all of a sudden they've got a lake of milk all over the thing and they've got to clean it up and it's, it takes that pressure. They started running analytics on how fast the cuts were happening. And they could pick up a pattern that when the cuts started taking a little bit longer, that meant the blades were getting a little bit duller, and they could proactively schedule a service appointment so that they could do that, and big benefits. So the analytics really helped them with that, and probably raised customer satisfaction. So, questions from the audience? Anyone have something they'd like to ask the august panel? And if I were you, I'd ask some questions, because otherwise you're going to get my questions. We have a question.
Thanks so much for the discussion. Just wondering how to connect all this device data with real-world scenarios like a doctor. So you're a doctor, physician, and a patient walks in and they have all this IoT data, and it's visible to the patient, not visible to the doctor. It's too much for the doctor to comprehend in a short visit. How do you connect those disparate worlds?
So what I understood was somebody's got some of these smart devices. They're really doing, quantified self. They know this, that, and the other thing. And they walk in and they go, here's a phone book worth of stuff, doctor, and I've got 20 minutes. Could you go through it and tell me what I should do?
Yes, it's a great example.
Something analogous to that?
Yeah.
Good luck. No, I think, and I'm sure that there's probably even companies that exist in the healthcare space that are doing that, but if you think about analytics, rules engines, and just displaying that data in real time and kind of bringing all those pieces together, I would say if someone's telling you that, hey, yeah, we have a solution that can do it, I would almost guarantee that there's still going to be custom work that needs to be done. So really understanding what the doctor is trying to get out of that data, what's most important to them about what they're collecting, and then really probably a lot of custom development on top of that to really make sure that I know when I walk into the doctor and I haven't been running for the past 2 weeks and he asks me why my cholesterol is so high, well, I guess I haven't been running for the past 2 weeks, I don't know, that just being able to know what those profiles look like to build the system to get to the answers that you need.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough problem, and we have now, consumer space, imagine this, we have 80 billion rows of data from all of our users who have booked on Hotel Tonight, and we have a team basically dedicated to figuring out things like lifetime value of users, which is basically walking through the entire history of a user and applying time to every event and looking at specific behaviors. And then you look at taking that data and processing it and reducing it down into patterns and specific behaviors. And you could think about it in a game system or even like Withings, where you're actually taking that data and you're assigning awards and achievements to specific users because they've accomplished something. And so, I mean, I think there are paradigms that exist in gaming, and also they're exposing themselves in IoT, whether it's wearables or, weighing yourself, or even, booking a hotel, whereas you're taking the customer's lifetime behavior and you're trying to compress it down into very, consumable chunks that make sense. And it's really tough, and obviously in the medical industry, it's like, hey, you've earned your first heart attack. Probably not the most exciting thing, or you're on your way to your first heart attack. Yeah, a little different, but I think there's patterns that they can apply.
So in your specific example, right, I mean, somebody who's into quantified self comes in and dumps a bunch of data on the doctor, and what do you do about it? Well, that's where some of the things we talked about earlier come into play. One, you have to have thought about, when you buy these, the wearable device makers or the self-quantifying device makers have to have thought about interoperability and the back end. So it really doesn't make any sense for me to come with 20 books worth of data to the doctor and expect them to analyze that. That shouldn't even happen in the first place. So what should have happened is what we talked about earlier, which is that these devices should ask you for permission to be able to transmit that data into a central store somewhere, and then have interconnections to the doctor's medical system, or even completely independent of that, with your permission and the doctor's permission, should be able to transmit some form of correlated information down to the doctor's office. So you shouldn't really need to walk in with 20,000 pieces of information all disparate. That should have been happening at the back end. So that's how you would have to solve the problem, and that requires several things: interoperability between all these different devices and some common language to talk about, some thought process to what you're going to store in the back end and how private that information can be or needs to be. How much of that are you going to expose to the doctor's office? How much are you allowed to do that under HIPAA and other various regulations, and some that will keep coming. And once so these different pieces have to kind of be falling into place for you to really use that quantified self-information beyond just for your own education.
Other questions? All right, I'd like to ask a question, and this is one that I didn't send to you, so it's sort of a wild card. But it sort of leads into one that I asked. I was sort of mulling over, so basically, my background's coming from the cloud side, and one of the common phrases there is software's eating the world. Basically every device, every service is now becoming a smart service. Uber, some people feel like it's overused as an example, but I think one thing you can say about it is it took a very static industry, applied technology to it in a way that really transformed it. And I'm sort of thinking about, you're at some company, just name it, think of any company you want. One I always think of is Clorox, because they're too far from here. And I met a guy once who, his job was, he was the product manager for kitty litter. He now is head of a foundation, but at that time he was head of this kitty litter. And so let's just say you're somebody like that, and somebody says, we need to do an IoT smart kitty litter thing. How do those people know even what you can do with technology? Because it seems to me this sort of, I'm a product manager, I know the 4 Ps, and now all of a sudden I got to know a T. Do you have any comments on that? So 2 of you are with companies that actually work with end users, or companies that are trying to put these things together. What the skill sets are like? Are they really there already, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, or is it something that's developing, or what? So, Louis, why don't we? Yeah,
I mean, I think that the skill sets are there. Whether or not they work at the companies that are thinking about this stuff, in the example of kitty litter, most likely not. But if they're asking the question about what do we do, you could do anything, right? Really, I mean, at least, I mean, that may be too bold of a statement, but it's really, you can answer the question, like I said earlier, about what can I do, why can't this do this or that do that? Like, okay, maybe, you know, I was talking to someone about dog food, right? Most people take their dog food and they put it into like a trash can, right, or something. So what can we do with IoT? Well, why don't you produce a container that people can put their dog food in. We know when it's getting low, we can put a weight sensor in there, or whatever it might be, and use Amazon Dash replenishment services and automatically order more dog food because we already know what the dog food is and we know that it's getting low. And by the way, we know the consumption pattern of your dog because we know how quickly it's being, how quickly the food is being eaten. I mean, in cases like that, so whether or not they have the resources, they're out there, right? There's companies out there like ours, or Vishal's, or a number of different companies, hardware design, EEs, and things like that can help with that. But really, whether or not we should even do that dog food example is the real question they need to start with, or is there even an opportunity with kitty litter? I know I just keep my kitty litter in the bag. I don't know if I really care too much to know if it needs to know the status of it, or maybe the litter box itself can be connected and let me know that, hey, you need to clean it out. You haven't done it for 2 days. That might be super helpful. It's just identifying what those use cases are outside of what you've traditionally done with those products. I mean, I think that's really where the real opportunity is, and a lot of that's even just purely digital and not even Internet of Things related. And that's what we've seen, especially with traditional product companies.
So I'll answer it two ways, Bernard. I'll give you a really out there use case, and then also what it needs, what kind of education is needed, for somebody at a Clorox PM position. So I think that there is a significant amount of education that actually does need to happen. It's not complicated education. A product manager doesn't need to understand, all of the gory technological details behind anything, but they do need to understand what you can do with it, and they need to be trained to think about the use cases in terms of a business context. Okay, we want to do something with IoT and kitty litter, like you said. What's that going to lead to? Is it going to lead to more business? Is it going to lead to more profitability? Is it going to lead to less expense? So that's what the PM needs to be trained about. But that does require them to be at least introduced to technology. And here's a use case. So let's say I put a sensor in the kitty litter. And I don't even know if it's possible. I'm just thinking aloud here.
Sensor, sorry?
In the kitty litter box,
yeah.
I have a sensor that somehow is able to sense, what kind of output the kitty is putting, and then decide if that's is that a marker for the kitty falling sick, for example? All right? And then alert the user with an app saying, hey, you know what, we've been observing this in the kitty litter, and you better take her to a vet. I don't know, maybe that's a use case, and they can charge a fee from the user saying, hey, we're giving you a value-added service here. All right, and then they tie up with some vets and say, yeah, these are the vets that will encourage their customers or patients to inform them about this. So here's a business case. Now the product manager can think about it and say, well, let's try it out. I mean, they sell millions of these. We have 70 million pets in the U.S. by the way. 35 million dogs and 35 million cats. There's a lot of kitty litter going around.
Wait, did I happen to fall onto a use case that you're actually working on with a customer?
No, not at all. So yeah, I mean, they need to be trained to think like that.
Sam, do you have an opinion on that? No?
I mean, just the talent that you need in-house if you really wanted to pull this off. I think any young programmer, I think the tools are there, the platforms are there. I think people can build these, build out these solutions, but then if you really want to take it to market, you're going to need some expertise in actually getting it productized.
Yeah.
I guess what I was getting at was, not to harp on the challenges I have at hotels, but that sort of, there probably is a product manager who didn't have that kind of, how do I accelerate this? How do I digitize it? How do I make it, and then sort of think it through. And that's the sort of thing I'm pointing at is like, how do you really infuse that technology in a way that is, an improved thing? By the way, with the dog food thing, I couldn't help but think about the opening scenes of Back to the Future, where the first thing that happens is an automated dog thing, and you probably maybe don't remember it, but it's, he's got, the Doc Brown has built this thing and it keeps, it puts it over to a can opener and opens it and then dumps it, and there's just a huge pile of dog food because the dog hasn't been in to eat it or something like that. So, good reason to go watch that movie again. It's a fun movie. Other questions? Any from the audience? I think we're coming up on, let's see. So, if you were advising an organization that wants to embark on an IoT initiative, what are sort of the 3 critical things they should do? What are the first steps? And Sam, why don't you start?
Well, I think understanding the problem is the first step. I mean, I think we've been, hounding that, and what is the key problem between, for express check-in at a hotel? I mean, you want to have 0 friction and be able to go directly to your room without a wait. And so you have to be able to solve that, and then you have to figure out, the ROI on that. And I think, what I'd recommend is, it's a problem that will really resonate with users. Go try it out, and then get the experience on what it's going to take to understand the logistics and the cost and the true cost of going forward with a solution like that. And then on a small scale, and then figure out if it's worth the effort and it's worth the cost. What we found out in our original trials is that users loved it, the logistics were very difficult, and it was not worth the expense. And so there are a lot of other problems that we could solve that had a lot higher ROI. And so I think everything product comes down to ROI and a great experience, and that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I just understanding the problem and then having a business case around you. So we just talked about the skid leader example or the dog food example. I mean, they're all legitimate cases, but either you have to do some pilot tests, or you have to do some customer surveys, or you have to do some kind of intelligent calculation to figure out whether this is viable enough to even go forward with it. And then when you actually do go forward, then you have to do some ROI analysis to see whether is it really working out. And it may be that it still is viable, but you got some kinks in the process, and that's what you need to figure out. Where are the expenses in this process? Maybe the way you're collecting it, because you don't have expertise. I mean, Clorox is not an expert in software, by the way, or may not be. I mean, maybe they are now, but so you need to have that expertise and maybe bring that in-house or partner with people who can give you that. And I think that's going to be another piece of the puzzle that's key.
Yeah, just to not beat a dead horse and talk about getting started, I would say if you have a viable use case and you think that you're going to move down this path, I would say first look for a partner that has done it before, and start hiring or finding folks within your organization that are design thinking focused, user experience focused. And lastly, kind of a critical element of this is don't leave a plan around what you're going to do with the data and the analytics until the last. Make sure you're doing that up front, because whether that, and then you may need to even hire a data scientist or a firm that is doing that to make sure that you have the right plan in place, because the worst thing that you could do is, and if you're a traditional consumer product company, this is your first opportunity, and this is going to be your first connected product. This is your first opportunity to start to have a conversation with the user outside of when that, because traditionally the leads a distribution center, goes to the retail store, and that's it. Now you actually have an opportunity to understand how that product is being used, and you don't want that data to go into just a vast sea of data, and you're not doing anything with it. So have a plan for that up front.
Just one thought that came to mind is one that I think people should be encouraged to think about a lot of new use cases, because there's a lot more possibilities now. We just discussed several of them. And then, but at the same time, not focus on very narrow markets. I mean, when you think of a use case, you have to start thinking about, well, how many of my prospective customers can really use this?
Yeah.
Or can I encourage them to use it? I mean, some customers don't realize you can do things by sensing in kitty litter, but if you made them aware of that, would they buy that service? Things like that.
It's interesting. I don't know how many in the audience were here this morning when I did the intro, but I talked about Amazon Dash service, and I think that's an absolutely brilliant service for a number of reasons. One is, and this really echoes this, one, it reduces friction to buying. It's like I don't even have to go to the browser to buy this stuff. I can just press a button. And now they've cut deals with people like washer and dryer manufacturers that they they sense, the devices sense when they're low on a thing, and they order it. You don't even know they ordered it. You'll just know when it shows up. A couple other things about it that I thought were quite interesting is, Amazon had a long free run where basically most of the brick and mortar competitors treated e-commerce as an afterthought or a kind of bolt-on. Now they've gotten really, Walmart is clearly, really trying to step up their game. Well, this is a way for Amazon to bypass that competition. Because if I went to the browser, I might say, well, it's here, it's this much at Amazon, but well, how much at Walmart? Now, all I do is press the button. I never get a look. So Walmart, it's a very clever business strategy. And then finally, I did a reverse engineering of it. One of the things I'm sure they do is they are sharing analytics and data with those partners in a way that they could never get from a Walmart, where Walmart tells them how much was ordered, maybe, and where it went, but not who bought it or demographics and all that. So a way to much richer data, very interesting thing. I think as a last question, I'm sorry I'm going to spring a different one, one that you guys have responded so well so far. And it sort of kicks off the last question. I heard 3 different sort of takes on, we need to do a prototype, we need to do a test, we need to do a trial. So clearly that's like a key thing that maybe people haven't thought about. What are the ground rules for doing prototypes or pilots or whatever you want to call them around one of these kinds of IoT projects to gather all the needs and so forth? Can you talk about that, and who's talking to start with you?
First, I would say what questions are you trying to answer, because there's a number of different ways. This is where we do a lot of proof of concepts with clients, and there's a number of different ways you can go. What are you trying to improve the infrastructure? So, hey, we're gonna test this out on Microsoft Azure, or you utilize AWS IoT. We're just gonna try to prove out getting data off something and getting it into the cloud and doing something with it. Or are you actually trying to prove that it's a viable use case? Those are 2 different approaches. Or if you're trying to do both, that's certainly fine as well. But just making sure that you define what it is that you want to undertake, and have a plan to do that. And also, if you're going to be answering technical questions along the way, going back to what Sam had said earlier, it's a lot different. Doing a proof of concept with a Raspberry Pi or Edison board or Arduino or something like that is a heck of a lot different than figuring out what the production hardware is going to look like that you're going to send off to get manufactured, right? So making sure you're answering those technical questions along the way, if that's part of.
So the manufacturability, if I can use that term.
Yeah, it's just is it even viable working with if you have if you're a company and you already have that your supply chain and everything like that, you can certainly work with the suppliers that you have, but more than likely with a proof of concept, if it's a proof of concept, you're proving out the use case for more of the back-end technical viability, and then you're going to move that forward into a next proof of concept that's more around just getting higher fidelity in terms of the hardware design and things like that.
Yeah, I'd say, I don't know if there are rules for prototyping. I mean, I think you have to, I think in some cases you just want to push the boundaries and see what's possible, and see how things go, and you want to make sure you have a limited investment in how many of these things you do. But for example, trying to get keyless entry working in hotels, through Google, a relationship between Hotel Tonight, Google, and then an undisclosed, hotel chain. It turns out, that the barrier to entry there was really, political versus, or market driven, and so, it may not be technology. It may not be. It could be something you totally don't expect. In this case, we were trying to figure out how do we, solve peace in the Middle East, and it is not going to be possible in the near term unless someone, a different group of people try to figure it out. So I don't know. Prototyping, you just got to push the boundaries. You can prove it's possible, but you might find some other thing that makes it impossible to really pull off. So
that sounds like you need to think of it, to treat it as an experiment.
Sure.
So, well, sometimes, these things get a sort of a life of their own and a momentum, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're trialing it, but, the next thing is we're going to roll it out in 55 markets.
You can only hope that that's the,
I think Sam hit the nail on that. I was going to say, first of all, get executive buy-in wherever you are. And I think that's pretty important, because otherwise you get into a lot of problems. And then building on what Louis said, it depends on, you have to define whether what aspect of that use case you're trying to test really. I mean, are you just trying to test your ability to go through the paces? Are you testing the infrastructure? Are you testing your ability to do the sensor bit? And then also where you play in that. I mean, if you're Clorox, maybe you don't really care about, you're not wetting the sensor technology, you're wetting the back end, you're wetting the user use case, but then you have to partner with somebody who gives you great sensors, seamless operation and so on, and will help you build the back end software. So at least you have to classify where in that use case you fit and who else you need to partner with. So I think that's very important to the success.
You're part of the value chain.
Yeah, it's very important to the success of the initial experiment, because if you didn't get that right and you're trying to do everything yourself, you'll soon find yourself out of your element in areas that you don't know what to do with.
Okay, well, I think that we've run actually a couple of minutes long. It's been a fascinating talk. I've learned a lot, I really appreciate it, and I think a round of applause would be appropriate.